Welcome back to ISO 2022 Made Simple. Over the past few episodes, we've taken the new standard apart piece by piece. We started with the basics, what ISO is all about, and how richer data can help banks strengthen risk management. Then we explored how the same rich data lays the groundwork for AI driven innovation. We also looked at the practical realities of migration, what it really takes to get there. And we compared regional nuances from Asia's fast moving adoption to Europe's more structured, established approach. And finally, we heard from our clients on both the opportunities and challenges that they face when adopting the new standard. Our previous episodes highlight the transformational impact of ISO to our industry. But most transformation programs fail, and the most successful transformations are people transformations. Today, we close the loop by shifting our focus on people. How will ISO impact banking professionals in their day to day roles? To unpack this, I am very excited to be joined by three distinguished leaders in Standard Chartered Bank who understand that ISO transformation is not just about systems, it's about people. So let's dive in. Today we are joined by John Emerson, Head of Transaction Banking Operations and Senior Accountable Executive for the Pan Bank ISO 202 program. Caroline Nigiki, Group Head Conduct Financial Crime Compliance Advisory, Transaction Banking. And finally, Mo Rahim, Standard Chartered Bank's Group Chief Data Officer. So let's start with you, John, as head of the Pan Bank ISO 202 program of Standard Chartered. I think we have seen that many banks underestimate the people side of payments transformation. Can you walk us through the workforce change that needs to support a large program like ISO 2022? And as the accountable executive for this program, what surprised you the most about the preparation needed for the various teams?
Well, good morning, Sunday, and thank you for that introduction. And yes, I think you said the senior accountable executive for the ISO implementation at Standard Chartered. This is a program that I've lived and breathed for the last 18 months. I've had numerous headaches around it, but very vested and excited about the ability to deliver, a future state payments capability for the bank and as part of the industry. To your question, I think it's been no surprise on the scale of the preparation required. And what wasn't truly anticipated is how challenging that is to do in a global organization with multiple impacted businesses and functions that are often used to operating in silos. The ISO 20022 adoption is the largest single change in the payments industry for decades. And I wouldn't say we needed to facilitate workforce change, instead more so workforce enablement, given we have a large team of experts who understand the payments industry, but a significant uplift in knowledge was required. I mean, what often gets underestimated is not the development or the testing effort, but the cultural capability shift required across the teams. And that's what surprised us most, specifically that preparation isn't uniform. Operations have to interpret enriched data. Financial crime compliance teams need to recalibrate screening models. Technology must build the bridges between legacy and modern formats. And the client-facing teams must have sufficient knowledge, obviously, to be able to advise our clients and help them with the way forward. So successful banks, treat this as a workforce transformation program, not just a technology project, with reskilling plans, change champions, and consistent communication across functions.
Thank you so much, John. And I think your job as the accountable executive is not easy. And clearly, you're truly passionate to be up for this complex task. So, John outlined a lot of significant preparation needed across the banks and different functions to ensure we are ready. Maybe I will shift over to you, Caroline. When you think about the compliance teams, how they engage the business, how do you think ISO 2022 will introduce new challenges from an operational resilience perspective?
Thank you, Sunday. My role within the bank is actually to support the business in managing risk effectively and to ensure that we have a sustainable business. So ISO 00222 has actually been a very good challenge moment for us in the compliance department, not just here at Standard Chartered, but also within the industry. And as John highlighted, there's a huge mindset shift that has been required, as well as filling in the skills gap that is required, including within the compliance function. Just touching on a couple of areas where I think the operational resilience is greatly impacted and what we are doing about it. I've mentioned three specific areas relating to financial crime compliance. Looking at the end-to-end data quality, of course, ISO 20022 does provide us with much richer data, and actually this is a very welcome area for us in managing financial crime compliance. Some of the challenges that we face is, and I think most people forget that you can have a richer data format, but actually your downstream systems do need to consume that amount of data and be able to interrogate that data, as well as the tuning of our systems when it comes to screening and monitoring. So that's one of the challenges that I see that is pretty intense within the industry, because all the other downstream systems that relate to financial crime compliance, surveillance and monitoring do need to come up to speed. The other complexity that I do also foresee is on the volume of data and the message sizes. So the more data we receive as an organization, the more storage requirements that we need for that particular data. We know storage, archival retrieval is something that is pretty central to our compliance program in managing not just payments, but any information that we have within the organization and handling that data effectively. So this is an area that is quite challenging, because the more volume of information that you have, the more storage you require and the more additional compliance requirements that are needed to manage that data effectively. The last point that I would highlight, which perhaps hasn't really had a lot of limelight, is in reference to sensitive data. So if we have more fields within the messaging system, we will inevitably have more personally identifiable information relating to individuals. I think overall within the payment services industry and with everything that we're doing within the financial services industry, more often than not, there is an individual linked to that data set or that needs to be handled carefully. And therefore, how we handle this sensitive data set over time in the richer data structure does also need to comply with certain data protection requirements that also come from multiple jurisdictions. And these can be actually very, very complex. So that's also another area of concentration that I do see coming up in discussions in the near future.
Thank you, Caroline. And John, I think you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on one point specifically around that resilience point. And it's recognizing that we're in a transition phase within the industry where the industry is looking to adopt, all this extra complexity. And what we've realized is that as we look to recalibrate our systems to maintain operational resilience, it does actually mean increasing our workforce. And I'm sure that's the same across, our peer organizations as well. So, yeah, we have had to, significantly increase capacity in certain parts of our payment processing teams and also within our screening teams to ensure we get the same level of throughput to meet the turnaround times expected of our clients. And we hope, obviously, that isn't sustained forever, but it will take time until we move back to normality.
Thank you, John and Caroline. I think maybe let me just now direct it to Mo as our Group Chief Data Officer. Everyone mentions that ISO 20022 will enable a massive increase in structured payments data. And as Caroline and John have outlined, this poses new complexities and challenges to make sure we can consume the data end to end, making sure that we can handle sensitive data in our payment messages. From a data strategy perspective, how do you think banks need to prepare their teams to handle this influx of data? And what are the opportunities as well that is ahead for us with richer, more structured data?
Thank you, Sunday. And firstly, I want to just call out to John and Caroline and their teams. Fantastic effort. I know this is not an easy undertaking, and the way you've been managing this is admiring to see. So I'm a huge fan of the way you've been running this program. So Sunday, back to your question. What are the things? I think there's three that come to mind straight away. The first one is we need good data modelers. We need people who can understand how to model the data better than it was in the past. Because when you move from unstructured free format to structured, you need to be able to model that data. And I'll give some examples in a minute. The second thing you need is good quality. It's not just about modeling it, but is that quality right for the payment? And the third one is understanding of the data. Do we understand that data, what it's for? Do we understand, to John and Caroline's point, who's using it, whether it's just being used to process a payment, or is it actually being used for screening purposes? So these are the three additional requirements when it comes to, from a data strategy perspective. So let me just dig into that a little bit deeper, right? So when we talk about data modeling, what do we mean? It's not just about, is the data in the right format, but it's also about, is the data in the right order? Because when you move from 4 lines to 140, odd characters, you need to make sure the data is in the right order, not just in the right format. So if we're talking about, intermediary, ultimate debtor, creditor, what order do these go in? So making sure that's in place is important. The second thing, like I said, was data quality. Is that data entered correctly in the source systems so that we don't have to redo work afterwards? Not just in the payment processing, but also in the screening process that happens subsequently. So that's also important. And then the third part is understanding what is the difference between these data elements? What role do they play in the payment versus what role do they play when we screen them? What role do they play for other purposes that we might use in the bank, be it analytics, be it insights, internal operations insights? So these are the three really important skills that the ISO program is bringing about in not just in our organization, but at the industry at large. And the next thing that you touched upon, Sunday, was what does this mean afterwards? Well, if you can do this right, then you can scale analytics and AI right. Because the number one challenge that all other organizations are facing when it comes to AI and analytics is not skills, it's not talent, it's not technical capability, it's the quality of data. So getting this right is not just fundamental to how we live today, it's actually crucial to how we adopt analytics and AI in future.
Thanks a lot for that, Mo. I think that's really powerful insight because sometimes we think we like to jump into the exciting technology, new technology like AI, and we forget that the AI has to sit on top of well governed, well understood data. So that's an excellent point. You also mentioned a lot about the purpose of the data and making sure we understand what we're going to use it for. So just building on that, ISO 20022 structured data can really enhance compliance. And that's really one of the drivers for this better monitoring, improved processes, real time detection. When you put yourself, Caroline, 5, 7, 10 years from now, how will this change how our compliance teams work? I see you smiling.
That is a good question, Sunday, because I think, as Mo alluded, the power of technology and also the speed at which technology is moving right now, it's actually hard to predict. So perhaps maybe the question is, if I had a magic wand, then what would that world look like? And what we would ideally want is a more proactive, data-driven risk management profile that actually gets ahead of the problem rather than us trying to run after it. So I'll give you an example. Could we have an instance whereby payment is stopped before settlement? Because certain typologies captured in the past can tell us a little bit more on the transaction monitoring side. Whereas today we do transaction monitoring post transaction. So are there instances where financial crime typologies could be identified and particular stops made at the point of the transaction itself, right? So you'd need data, but also you'd need speed. But at the same time, we need an integrated model so that whatever is happening within the payment infrastructure is well integrated with the compliance modules that are required to be able to provide this level of intelligence. Maybe just looking into this a little bit further, one of the areas that we do struggle as an industry more generally is on reporting. Our reporting capability, how that data is drawn, especially for very complex organizations, large complex organizations face this challenge. And when we think of certain compliance-related reporting requirements, such as filing a suspicious activity report, I would hope in future that we would have technology that helps to actually write these reports for us on the basis of the transactions that have already occurred and the patterns that the system sees within the client profile. And so when I go back to looking at ISO and the MX message format and the richness of that data, I see that as quite integral in our reporting and enhancing the reporting, whether that is for a SAR or it is more general regulatory reporting that is required, that actually helps to improve our data governance and ensure accuracy within that reporting. And then the last part on this is on the reporting to the financial services regulated, but also we have an obligation to report financial crime to, say, the police or any other entity in order to be able to stop that criminal activity right away. One of the complexities that we have is the cross-border sharing of the data, be it within governments or be it within entities such as regulatory bodies from one market to the next. There have been a lot of incentive to be able to share data cross-border, especially when it relates to financial crime compliance. And we do know, especially Sandy, you and I have worked on a lot of data localization concerns and issues, and we do know that that is a real perhaps even a threat to being able to be truly cross-border in the information sharing lens. So when we come back to ISO and SWIFT, and one of the benefits actually for using the SWIFT network is that a lot of these complexities on cross-border information movement go away. How is it that we can leverage the message formatting richness that we have now to inform different parties within different jurisdictions of what we are seeing within the payment messages? Is there a world in the future when we could use messages to do that? Perhaps that's something that we should consider.
That sounds like a really long answer around it's going to be a reduced cost of compliance.
We usually do not challenge the reduced cost of compliance. I think the key thing is to make sure that we are spending the compliance, not just the funding, but also the talent where it's truly needed. So the threat of reduction of compliance due to technology is live already, and hence back to your original point, John, on reskilling our workforce. How do we think differently around these roles? what should my role be in the future if we already have this technology role. So it's a welcome challenge.
Well, thank you for that, Caroline. And I think what you're saying is that the technology allows us to do a little bit of a shift left and make our processes more efficient. So instead of transaction monitoring being post facto, we can, because we have a better understanding of the financial crime topology, be able to actually do that while the transaction is being processed. And automation, you talked a lot about technology helping us to write SARs and generate regulatory reports, maybe even our operations teams generating RFIs. I think that automation is one of the things that people talk about when it comes to emerging technology and things like AI. But it's also perhaps about augmentation in terms of how do, as you guys are saying, reskill our workforce so that they can work on more value-added tasks. So let me turn to you now, John. When we think about the automation that can be enabled by ISO 2022, for our colleagues in transaction banking operations teams, how can we help them transition from processing tasks to more analytical, data-driven insights work that has been talked about in this podcast? What skills do you think are becoming most important for operations professionals?
I'll try and do my best to not fall into the trap of saying it'll end up with a lower cost of operations for the payments industry as well. So look, there is a risk here. I actually repeat a fair number of things that Caroline's just talked about. The typical MX payment message is 10 times in size compared to, the MT message. Where we've got 20 elements, in the MT messages vis-a-vis 60 in the MX message and potentially up to 800 plus elements in a single message. The game has changed completely in the way that we handle that data-rich message. I think that structured data is also a really exciting opportunity for the industry. However, we anticipate there'll be a period of increased inefficiency as the industry adopts sort of the many different interpretations across the different industry players. If you look at HVPS go live in markets, there's a little different interpretation in many of the jurisdictions around how that actually works. It will take time, I think, for the industry to move to a more consistent standard use of the formats and the data-rich message. But when that happens, that will unlock significant opportunities. Of that, there is no doubt. And aligned to the adoption of AI across the industry, still in its infancy, but I think we all expect that will move very quickly forward. I think we are at the start in our period of significantly higher straight-through processing and more effective financial crime detection capabilities, similar to what Caroline was talking about. When we think of the traditional sort of operation skills around client service, of problem solving, driving further automation, those things will never diminish. They'll still be required. But operations practitioners, I expect, will probably, will need to be more comfortable working with AI, as will we all, and with analytical tools, more so to proactively identify client and efficiency opportunities, for us and the broader industry. So the job will be less about fixing the individual break and then moving on to the next exception, which unfortunately is quite endemic, but rapidly identifying the root cause at the point of origin in the ecosystem, at whatever point in the chain that happens, and then fixing it at that source and ensuring future automation for that flow for all of the participants. And that is a game changer, I think, for the industry. So back to the question about skills, I think the most valuable skills now will become critical thinking, curiosity, and to comfort to work with the digital tools. And banks that invest early in reskilling their workforce will not only reduce operational risk, but will also create teams of the strategic partners to the business and compliance rather than exception processes.
Thank you for that, John. That's a really good, very balanced approach. There are exciting opportunities in terms of people and talent, but as you said, actually, in the beginning, perhaps there's increased inefficiencies and even more focus on processing our capabilities. So it's a great lead-in to now maybe ask Mo this question. As we move from basic payment processing to richer data analytics in an organization, it really requires a cultural shift across the bank. as the chief data office for the group, how are you fostering data literacy beyond just the data teams? And John said sometimes these needs embracing new technology. What approaches work best for getting non-technical staff excited about data or AI possibilities?
Thank you, Sunday. I really liked how John explained it, actually, and I'm going to extend on what he and Caroline said in a bit more detail. So if you think about the core identity of us as a bank and as an institution, we're not a data company. And I think that's where we have to start. We are a bank. So what do? We service customers. We facilitate trade across the across the globe. So the way to help people understand data and enhance data literacy is first, don't start with data, start with their roles. What is it that you do? If you're an operations head, someone in John's team. So if I worked for John tomorrow or today, let's just say, I never start with, I need to know the beneficiary name. I always start with, I need to process this payment. And then I need to in order for me to process this payment, I need to know beneficiary name, right? Amount, address, and then it needs to be in the structure. So the important message that we're trying to embed across the organization is understand what outcome we're trying to solve before we try and fix our data. Because if you do it the other way, you're going to do this forever. And what I really like about this program is it did it in the right way. It started with what is the problem we're trying to solve, which is payments, right? How do we make payments more structured, faster, reduce risk, reduce operations burden? So that's really important when it comes to data literacy. The second part of data literacy, as you explained, Caroline, is the technical part. How do I actually bring in good data modelers who understand how to structure, whether it's a payment, whether it's a trade, whether it's a risk? How do I, a risk exposure, how do I bring in people who know how to model that? That's a technical skill, right? So that's the next level of competency that we need to build as an industry. The third part is, once you have that core foundation, how do you maximize it? Because now you're sitting on such rich data. What can you do with that data? You can do a lot with that data. You can use that data to tell you how efficient we are in the processing, how many errors we have in the processing, whether we can apply any AI or analytics over and above that, over and above statistical analysis. So when it comes to literacy, it's really about starting with what is it that you're trying to do? And then what data do I need? Then once you know that, it's the technical modeling. Once you can do the technical modeling, what can I do with that data beyond, just processing a payment? I can do a lot more with it to inform how I can get better at processing, how I can serve the client better. So these are the three steps, effectively, the way I think about this. And then the data governance is the wrapper that sits on top of all of that, making sure we've got good roles and responsibilities, good data owners. We know what the golden source is. The data flows in a linear direction. So the data governance acts as the wrapper once we have these three things, Sunday.
I love your take on the fact that we have to start with the people, right? We don't start with the data, we start with the people, and having people understand really why are we doing this? What is the business outcome or impact that we want to make? And I think that makes it super practical for every one of us. And we don't have to be technical, as you said. As long as we understand our objective and our goals, then we can partner with the right teams. And literacy really starts with that. So that's an amazing thing, insight. And I think what it tells me is that we really need to collaborate. So maybe let me just go back to John. So the ISO 2022 transition really is breaking down traditional department boundaries in banks. And it requires a new level of collaboration between operations, technology, compliance, data, and business teams. How do you see workflows changing to enable this cross-functional collaboration? And really, what resistance have you encountered, if any?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that in reverse order. And resistance is an interesting word. I don't think we saw any specific resistance within the overall program across the bank in, on how we needed to move forward to get things done. But where we really saw a challenge actually was it was mostly cultural. Teams are comfortable operating in their swim lane. They generally fear accountability when visibility is shared. So it's about getting the teams out of their silos and recognizing the interdependence that they have on each other. We had a bit of an epiphanal moment probably at the back end of last year when our original plan became no longer viable. And I think, Sunday, you might have been in some of those workshops. And we brought the key 50 people across the bank that are responsible for delivering this program, and we worked through those challenges. And what became abundantly clear to everybody is that we're all codependent on each other to actually achieve the outcome. We had a huge amount of subject matter expertise in that room, but everybody previously was operating and only focusing on their little bit. But when we had realized actually that codependence and the fact that we have to handshake and every single part needs to be aligned, you began to see that community come together across the bank, and any form of resistance and that type of challenge really fell away. It became an execution problem rather than a cultural problem. To your question with regards to tooling, we do have utilities within the organization. Our main payments engine is a utility for the bank. So that is a consistent tooling that can be leveraged by all. At this point, I don't think we've necessarily taken it the furthest step I'd like, where actually the information that is required for all participants across the bank is available in one portal for them to pull on and to benefit from. We're iterating towards that. But a little bit back to some of the points earlier is, as long as we're able to capture that detailed data in a place where it can be pulled from to be consistent, and then each of the different users to be able to, deliver the services or capabilities or controls that they need to manage, I think that begins to take us forward. There's still further to go in that journey, and maybe we'll do that more as I talked about that standardization phase that I foresee coming in the next 2 to 3 years across the industry. That maybe is the point where we unlock that. And just thinking off the top of my head, the reality is AI, and Mo is the expert on this one, is only as good as the data that it can get hold of. And hence, the great part about this is, we are making sure that data is held in a consistent way, and maybe that will unlock all the benefits we hope that AI will bring to us.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I think Mo wants to chime in here, John.
I couldn't agree more with what John has said, Sunday. That's why I just wanted to chime in here. The biggest and there was a study by MIT, I think that came out a couple of weeks ago. One of the biggest challenges that organizations are facing when it comes to AI success deployment is not talent, it's not technology, it's not operations, it's data. So getting this data in a structured format is only going to help you, right? So it's definitely the right way forward. Forced hand, but for it's going to help us in the long run when it comes to adopting AI.
Since you have the mic, Mo, let me turn to you, because as John was talking a little bit about people are comfortable in their swim lanes and the importance of building, common utilities across the bank. As head of the Chief Data Office, which is, helping enable all the business, wealth, retail, and the corporate investment bank and the functions, I'm sure you're very familiar in working with teams in different swim lanes. From a chief data office perspective, what are the new capabilities that you're building to enable the different business and functions teams to work with data and AI effectively. And similar to John, I want to ask you, have you faced any resistance?
Yeah, I mean, similar to John, resistance is a strong word. I think it's always a question of just making sure people are comfortable that this is going to land successfully. Are we setting this up properly? Are we mitigating the risks? Have we thought through the success, the benefit of this, right? So sometimes that gets confused with resistance. It's not resistance. It's actually people's intentions of doing this properly. And I'm sure John will agree, right? Everyone wants to do this properly. It's not resistance. It's how do we navigate that safely? So have I had those challenges? 100% yes. And I'd say the biggest challenge for my type of role or my type of organization is it's really about making sure it works for the business. So when we're building capabilities, it can't be generic capabilities. Does it complement what the business is already doing? Does it help the business become more effective? So that's really, really important. Now, to answer your question, Sunday, what are the capabilities we're bringing in? One of the most important ones, and I've really learned a lot from this ISO program, is having good data modelers. So I'll give you an analogy, right? Very simple analogy. Imagine if we take a food analogy. Now, if you go to a restaurant and you're a consumer of that food, what do you want? You want, let's just say John wants pizza or Caroline wants bread. What would you really like? You'd really like that dough that was made to be consistent, right? You don't want 50 different ways of making that dough. And that's what we really talk about, the modeling of data. It's taking raw data, raw ingredients like salt, water, flour, and making consistent dough. So data modeling is that. It's how do we take data, enter it properly in raw form, but then how do we then aggregate it in a consistent way for consumption? That's one big capability we're introducing and bringing in. The second capabilities are really about operating model, understanding what is the role of the business in making sure that the data is correct for its outcomes, but not just for the business, but for anyone who consumes that data. Like John will know this, but the whole bank consumes his data, but for different purposes. So does John, as the creator of that data in the bank, know who all the different people are? Very difficult, right? Very difficult for him to know. So what is the other capability we're creating? It's about lineage, understanding the end-to-end lineage of data from source all the way through to consumption. And the next capability is making sure that there's that conversation. It's not a technical capability, but it's a capability that's needed. I'm using this data John, I'm using your data to report this to a regulator. Are you okay with that? And he needs to be okay with that. So that's the next capability. And then once we get these right, that's when you can start saying, you know what? We can start applying analytics on this, because that's when you get confidence. So the biggest capability that we're bringing, I think that we need to bring is the capability of confidence in our data for the outcome that's intended.
Thank you, Mo. I mean, I love how you really are very focused on the underlying data governance, that because sometimes I think we are very tempted to jump into the data analytics straight away, or these days to the AI solution straight away. But as you said, the analytics or the AI must sit on top of well-governed, trusted data. And I think it's super important. So thank you for that. Caroline, I think you wanted to add something.
Yes, I did, and thanks, Mo. And the point that I wanted to make was in reference to your point on standardization, and just reflecting back on the compliance conversations. And really early on in the journey, a lot of people are asking, isn't this a regulatory requirement, or is this a SWIFT requirement, or is this an ISO requirement? And getting this sort of confusion around what is the actual end state, right? So we do know ISO as an organization, their role is to bring standardization, and they have been effective across multiple areas for decades. And really reflecting back on why does ISO exist as an entity, so the International Organization for Standardization, and then subsequent to that, why does the standardization in payments exist when we think of the G20 goals around speed, cost of doing business, financial inclusion, really getting people to the table in a more globalized way, and really just honing that point about standardization is really key. Back to your point more on the dough, right? How do you ensure that you do it once, you do it well, but actually has multiple purposes?
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. And let me stay with you a little bit, because something Mo said about the group data office is there to enable the business, make sure that capabilities are not generic, and that it works for the business. The compliance function is also a enabler for the business, working collaboratively and closely with the business teams, but also technology and operations teams. How do you balance effective collaboration without compromising the independence of second line risk managers?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Sunday, especially for those compliance roles that are working with frontline teams. So we call them in Standard Chartered coverage teams, stroke advisory, whereby we have to be very skilled in balancing being an independent guardian, which is usually the core part of the compliance role, which is the challenge element of it, versus being an advisor, a trusted advisor to the business. And I think that is a very, very key important part of our role. We have seen, especially during our journey on ISO 20022, closer collaboration with operations and technology within Standard Chartered and the compliance function. I think John will tell you that my team and I are heavily embedded in what's happening within the program, but also really being able to understand the risks that come with every step that we take within the program. One of the areas that I would really like to dive into is this coexistence period that we have between the MT and MX messaging. And a lot of entities, financial institutions, are really facing a challenge in this area. And we do know that SWIFT has provided solutions to help banks and other institutions to be able to bridge this gap. We do know that that comes with data truncation, data drop, and other complexities that do impact our overall data governance, whether we're talking about quality or other elements of financial crime compliance that are required to be performed from that data set. And what I have seen within the organization is a very close collaboration between us and operations and technology, the COO teams, to really design the solution together. And the other element that I think is important is really ensuring that the compliance component is not just for compliance to solve. This is something that is very well embedded within transaction banking as a business across the bank. And so the ownership of risk management really does flow end to end within the organization. And what that actually means for us within compliance is we're no longer just in the detecting, it's also the preventative, but also collaborating and working together. Many a times we hear from the operations or technology teams who actually talk about what risks they are facing and asking us to collaborate with them to be able to find solutions. The other element that I think is important just to balance this out is to maintain oversight during this transition. We do owe it to our business to make sure that that independence is maintained, whether it's through assurance or any stress testing that might be required. And this is something that we have been speaking about in our transition journey as we do convert messages, and what are the type of reports that we would want to see? What are the type of reports that management need to see? What are the type of testing that we should be considering as we go through this journey? So making sure that we are still undertaking that independent assurance testing, but at the same time, also collaborating with the business and working hand in hand in the solutioning.
Thank you, John. You wanted to add to that, I think.
I just wanted to give a perspective, actually, of what it feels like from the other side. I've got the responsibility of, obviously, for payment operations, and I also have the responsibility for delivering this program. And I think Caroline used the term trusted partner. And that is exactly what it is and exactly what it needs to be, because the reality is, we can be, the first line can be just stuck in BAU issues, client challenges, implementation challenges, trying to meet the deadlines. And having a strong compliance team that has the time and the ability to understand your challenges, but sit back from it and to be able to brainstorm with you, oh, have you thought about this? What about that? How do we deal with that? And collaborate with you through that really complex journey actually allows for really good outcomes. And certainly where we were 6 months ago to where we are now, the level of comfort through the organization because of that challenge and that partnership has been very strong. I don't see it changing in the future. I just think actually the world just becomes ever more complicated and becomes even more important.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I think if I may sort of build on a point that Caroline was just mentioning about many institutions are different stages of their journey in terms of adoption. And we do see that ourselves. Many banks still face legacy payment systems and processes. So moving from MT to MX, it's not easy. When you think about, and this question is to you, John, when you think about institutions or banks in emerging markets, they may have smaller teams, limited resources, still dealing with legacy infrastructure. What strategies can work for operations transformation when resources may be limited? How do you build new people capabilities in sometimes resource challenge environments?
Yeah, I mean, operating in emerging markets is challenging. Very challenging. And I think actually where we are in the broader program is probably more challenging now than ever, with constantly changing dates around when HVPS go lives need to happen. But look, I think success comes from effective prioritization and being creative. Instead of trying to implement, the full solution across all our markets at once. I mean, whether that was even feasible or not is debatable. But we focused on, a gradual delivery that is manageable for the locations, because we don't have scale, in some of the markets on the ground in the way that we do in some of our hubs. I think the way that the HVPS country implementations have happened, it has been staggered over the last 2.5 years, which has allowed a more gradual build-up of capability across our markets. The other bit that helps us also is that we do have, obviously, the lion's share of our processing activity is centralized in our centers of excellence in India, Malaysia, and China. And that does mitigate some of the reliance we have on our specific country teams. But that said, we need to lift everyone all at the same point. And sort of to bring that to life, what have we been doing? So we've been focusing on those future ready skills, leveraging digital learning, including the mandatory e-learning assessments that we all love on a regular basis. But that demonstrates, and gives us assurance that that knowledge is being understood by the people at the coalface. We do project gigs. We've got a capability called Talent Marketplace that allows our team members to move around, do small gig type work that gives them the ability to uplift. And we've got some strategic upskilling that we're doing around data analytics, digital and leadership, very specific in the operations space. And of course, we still leverage what I would call sort of the more traditional learning methods. Nothing like testing and UAT to be able to, get a team up the curve on, new schemas, new processes and new tooling. And where needed, we do obviously drop, skilled resources into our locations as and when, we have a go live happening, if we feel that we need more firepower on the ground. And we've got a squad of people that move around the globe or move from market to market as we look to deploy, obviously to help the deployment itself, but actually do the training and the upskilling of the team in the location.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I think, as you said, there's a lot of training and knowledge out there that we can leverage, and some of them actually is free. So there's a lot of ISO 202 content on the public domain, including this podcast series, which is available on Spotify and YouTube and so forth. So I think in the product teams as well, we are very excited. We've enabled our colleagues by sending them to certification programs on ISO 222, for example, run by Swift. And I think when people undertake the training programs, they are very excited about the possibilities ahead. So this next question is to you, Caroline. Looking a bit ahead, how do you see ISO 2022 intersecting with digital identity, fraud detection, or AI-driven risk management?
Thank you, Sunday. So I think this is a really good question, given that there has been a lot of conversation around how the richness in the messaging may help in detecting more fraudulent transactions and really assisting in financial crime prevention. So it is agreed that the consistent data mapping will definitely help with having better build in the topologies for fraud detection. However, how we understand our clients, I think, is going to be quite integral in that. So it cannot be seen as independent to the overall ecosystem of understanding the client, understanding geographies, understanding payment corridors, and really looking at those different types of risks. So fraud is just but one of them. But of course, within AML, we have a myriad of other categories that are linked to financial crime compliance. And we do hope that this particular way of operating, of having a bit more information, is going to actually help in the preventative piece. On the going forward element of it, one of the things that I did want to highlight is, because of the way in which, in order to process the payment, you more often than not, you'll not need all the lines of data. But actually, from a monitoring perspective, one of the key things that's going to really help us is when we want to go back and have a look as to the client behavior and also the context of the actual payment. You did mention this early on, Sunday, in terms of RFIs. We do know that request for information is something that we do across organizations, and this particular data set will help us have a bit more information that perhaps prevents that level of question going back to the counterparty, because you already have that information within the message set. So just going into digital identity integration, we do know that a lot of governments have already started working towards having a digital identity. And these are locations where Standard Chartered actually does play a big role in terms of being present. Now, using your digital identity to be able to integrate within the payments world, I think that's going to be something very, very powerful. We see countries such as India with the Aadhaar system being also very protective of the level of data that you can extract. And we hope that in future, there will be an element of being able to determine what is the actual data sets that you need from that digital identity token, so to speak, in order to do X, right? So perhaps you don't need all lines of Caroline data or all the 10 lines. You perhaps need the top 2, right, in order to do the actual processing of the data. But as more and more organizations, as more and more governments move to having a digital identity mandate across the globe, we hope that that will also help to move data a bit more freely. In terms of AI-driven risk management, where AI tools are being used to support things like sanction screening, perhaps is an area that I will speak to a bit more closely, because Standard Chartered, we have been heavily involved in this area of using AI tools for sanction screening. Again, I would like to see a much more developed manner in which the speed at which we're able to do it, but also the volumes in which we're able to put through. This has also been a very challenging area to scale, but with a richer data set, I would like to think that that is a challenge that we can try and overcome with the AI tools being developed and being enhanced as well.
Thank you, Caroline. So we have had so many great insights from all three of you, and we're now going to enter a little bit more of a lightning round where I'll ask a couple of questions for the three of you to sort of chip in and answer. And the first one really is a little bit of a wrap-up conversation as we listen to this conversation. And here it is. As we think about the industry adoption of ISO 2022, what is the one piece of advice you can give to business leaders on the people transformation journey, but particularly when we think about capabilities and talent development? Maybe we'll start with Mo.
Thanks, Sunday. What is the biggest piece of advice on the people capabilities, right? I think I always say this, it's about it. You have to first start with making sure people understand the business outcome that we're trying to achieve, and being very clear on that. I have three leadership principles. The first one is clarity. Be very, very clear. So if you want to transform your people and upskill your people, even if we take something like AI, I always tell everyone, it's not about AI, it's not about the technology, because today it's AI, tomorrow it's something else, right? It's always about what is the outcome? What is it we're trying to achieve? And how does AI, or how does better structured data, or richer data help you get there? That's all it's about. So the first principle I always follow around people transformation is making sure we understand the outcome. Then it's about educating them about how they get there. And that includes all the training that John and Caroline spoke about. It includes the risk of what we're doing, explaining the risk, right? Do we really understand the risk, and doing that risk assessment? So my first principle is understand the outcome, make sure that your people are aligned to that, and educate them and upskill them towards that outcome rather than generically.
Caroline, do you want to add?
Yes, happy to. I mean, Mo's covered most of it, if not all. The two things I would like to add is the two clients. And when I mean by two clients, I mean the external clients that we service as an organization. So I would also highly encourage that people have a good understanding of what does a client actually want to achieve, and also what does the industry want to achieve. The second client that I would want to bring into scope is also on the regulator side, and really understanding what the regulatory ask is. The reason why I bring this in the topic is because even though, as I said earlier, there had been this whole discussion is ISO 20022 a regulatory ask or an industry standard ask, is because when we really saw traction in most of the markets, especially our emerging markets, is when the central banks now had to do it, and then they had to deal with their domestic rails, and then that meant all the FIs in that market then had to do it. So really understanding that regulatory lens is key, and a call to compliance officers working with the business to open those doors for those conversations with those regulators, especially as we get to November, when we get to very tricky timelines, so to speak.
Thank you, Caroline. John?
From my perspective, I think it's quite simple. Just don't treat ISO 20022 as just a technology upgrade. Treat it also as a people capability upgrade. The success of this particular migration, it all hinges on people. Those people understanding new data flows, new compliance requirements, the new client conversations they're going to need to have, and working together to unlock the potential of growth that the ISO 20022 market change carries.
Thank you so much. Okay, before we wrap up, we usually do a little myth busting. And this is always the same question we ask every speaker and guest. What is one common misconception you hear about ISO 2022? It could be people, skills, teams, talent, or technology and processes. What is this misconception that you think needs to be set straight? Let's start with you, John.
Excellent. I was hoping you'd go to Mo and Caroline first. Misconception. I think, it's just another messaging format. It's not. This is a watershed moment for the global payment industry, and the new standard just shifts us into a world of significant opportunity for efficiency. So, it's not just a new messaging format. This is a watershed moment for the industry.
Caroline?
Sure. Thank you. The myth that I often hear and read about is that ISO will solve for financial crime compliance. The reason why I think that's a myth is it is a solution to help in fighting financial crime compliance. But poor data quality is still a real risk, right? We heard this from Mo before. This is still a real risk because of what goes into the system, and the data integrity is pretty important in terms of how we then use that information to fight financial crime. And the other element of this is that just having a payment message in a payment system doesn't really solve any financial crime of any kind. We still need the downstream systems to be closely interlocked with our payment infrastructure in order to be able to consume that data. So interoperability is pretty critical to solving for financial crime by the use of ISO enriched messaging.
Mo?
A bit controversial, but we'll stay with that one.
Can you top that one, Mo?
I can't. I guess mine's very specific. I think the other common misconception is it only impacts cross-border payments. I think yes, the priority has been cross-border payments, but it's beyond that, right? It includes other high-value payments as well. So that's the other more common misconception from my perspective, anyway.
Thank you so much, John, Mo, and Caroline. What a fantastic conversation. Over the course of this series, we've looked at ISO from every angle. What it is, why it matters, how it's being adopted across regions and markets, what it means for the industry, and finally, today, how it impacts the people driving it forward. We hope these conversations have helped you see ISO 2022 not just as a technical standard, but as all three of our guests said here today, a real enabler of change in banking. In our final episode, we will hear what this means for both corporate and FI clients. A big thank you to our guests and to you, our listeners, for joining us in this journey. And this is Sunday Domingo, Global Head of Digital Channels in Standard Chartered Bank, for this episode of ISO 2022 Made Simple. Thank you very much.